Hey everyone, welcome back. It's time for another edition of the Pick Six. I'm your host, Mike Wobschall, inside the TCO studios at the Twin Cities Orthopedics Performance Center, ready to get to work and answer some of your questions. So let's get to it. The first one comes from Cade in Burnsville. What is our depth like at tight end? I think it's pretty good. Of course, we all know we got the veteran, Kyle Rudolph, who just signed a contract extension earlier in the week. So he leads this group. Now, he's the veteran. After that, it's a pretty young, athletic group of tight ends on the Vikings roster. Coming back from last year's roster, you have Tyler Conklin, David Morgan, and Cole Hicatini. All those guys can help out. But remember, we also drafted a tight end this year, Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama, right there, number 84. He's going to be able to help the Vikings tight ends in 2019. The Vikings also have Brandon Dillon. So 6 total tight ends on the roster right now as we wrap up the offseason program. The next question comes from João in Brazil. Out of all the draft picks, who do you think will stand out the most this season? Ooh, interesting question. Some pretty compelling choices to make here, and all of them happen to be on offense, but I'm going to go with that guy right there, Garrett Bradbury. The Vikings drafted him in the first round, of course, out of NC State, and it looks like he's going to be the starting center on the offensive line, which will move Pat Elflein to guard. So I think Garrett Bradbury stands the best chance to make an immediate impact for the Vikings. But also on offense, you have the aforementioned Irv Smith right there, who's going to help in the passing game. And you also have a running back out of Boise State, Alexander Madison. The Vikings selected him in the 3rd round. He's going to work with Dalvin Cook to help the Vikings out at running back. So a pretty good group of offensive weapons from this year's draft class, including 2 wide receivers in the later rounds. But I think Garrett Bradbury is going to help the Vikings offensive line big time. The next question comes from Jeff in Sacramento. Other than health, what would you consider the biggest intangibles that will affect the Vikings championship drive? Well, when it comes to intangibles, this is where the head coach and your leadership comes in. It's head coach Mike Zimmer's job to get the team in the right mindset. I think he's a very good motivator. So I have no worries about Coach Zimmer's responsibility with getting this team ready to play. After coach, though, it's up to some of the veteran players to step up and be good leaders. A lot of those guys are on defense, and that's the identity of this Vikings team. The Vikings need to play with a chip on their shoulder like this guy does, Adam Thielen. They need to have their swagger like they had in 2017, and they got to be all about business, which that guy is all about. So the 2019 Vikings, I think they're going to have their swagger back, and they'll be ready for business. Next question comes from Reagan in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It seems like a foregone conclusion that Elflein is moving from center to guard, and Bradbury is taking over at center. Why is it that way and not Bradbury going to guard? Interesting question. This is something the coaches, I'm sure, wrestled with in the pre-draft process and even during the offseason program. Both Bradbury and Elflein played both guard and center in college, so the Vikings coaches still have some options as they work through different combinations along the offensive line. It comes down to who's the better center between the two, and the other guy, can he be a good guard? As I said, both of these guys played both positions in college, so the Vikings are in very good shape when it comes to the interior of the offensive line because of the selection of Garrett Bradbury. Next question comes from Ben in Covington, Georgia. Is Avion Collins back to full health? Given his size and athleticism, I see him fighting for a spot along the interior. I do see Avion Collins fighting for a spot along the Vikings offensive line. He looks to be back to full health, but I'm not convinced it's going to be on the interior. I think Collins can also play as a left or a right tackle. So he's going to be an interesting guy to watch during training camp when the pads come on. That's when you can really evaluate offensive and defensive linemen. Collins missed most of last season to an injury, but now he's back, and he's a guy to watch during training camp to see where he fits in. Next question comes from Darren in Albert Lee, Minnesota. Who is the tallest player on the team? How about the shortest? Do these measurables even matter anymore? Well, we'll start with the measurables. Who are the tallest players on the Vikings roster? 2 of them. They're both offensive tackles. Storm Norton and Brian O'Neill, they measure in at 6'7". The shortest player on the Vikings roster, well, that honor used to go to punt returner and DB Marcus Sherrills, but now it's that guy, running back Amir Abdullah, who is going to be in the running for the return roles now that Marcus Sherrills is gone. Do these measurables matter? No, not really. The only time they could matter is in specific one-on-one matchups, like if you're going against a really tall receiver, you might favor a taller cornerback to go against that receiver. Or if you're in the red zone and you're trying to decide which receivers to put on the field, you might choose a taller receiver. Other than that, height and weight at this stage of the equation, they don't matter. It's all about what's inside, and it's all about your skill set. That's going to do it for this week's edition of the Pick Six, but we encourage you to use the email address at the bottom of the screen. Submit your questions, your thoughts, and your opinions, and maybe we'll see you in next week's edition of the Pick Six. In the meantime, stay tuned to Vikings.com. The Vikings mandatory minicamp is happening this week here at TCO Performance Center. We will have wall-to-wall coverage of all the action, so stay tuned to Vikings.com for more.